Hi. Uh, Today I'm going to discuss Cambridge A-level paper, May, June 2020, paper 4, 970242. The URL to download this paper is given in the description part. So please go to the description part and follow the instructions given so you can download the paper. Right. So the first question, define gravitational potential at a point. So that is, we know that work done per unit mass, 1 kilogram mass, normally we say work done per unit mass when it is moved from infinite distance to a point. Is defined as the gravitational potential at that point. Work done in moving 1 kilogram mass or unit mass from infinite distance to a point is defined as the gravitational potential at that point. Okay, so part B, an isolated solid sphere of radius r may be assumed to have its mass m concentrated at its center. The magnitude of the gravitational potential at the surface of the sphere is phi. They are giving this figure and they asked to show the graph how the gravitational potential on y-axis varies with distance from r to 4r, right? So, the gravitational potential is given by V equal minus Gm over R. That's a general equation. The gravitational potential is negative always. The reason, gravitational force is attractive. So, since the gravitational force is attractive, actually work will be done by the gravitational field. So, when you are moving 1 kilogram mass from infinite distance to a point. So this is the planet. Normally we don't feel the gravitational effect from other objects. Say if it is a planet. So if you want to find the gravitational potential at this point, P, when 1 kilogram mass is moved from infinite distance to this point, actually external work is not required because gravitational force is always attractive. So gravitational field will do work. So that's the reason, since the force is attractive, the gravitational potential is negative. Okay, but when we are defining electric potential, how do we define? Say if there's a point charge Q, what will be the electric potential at point P if they ask? There we need to move 1 coulomb charge, positive 1 coulomb charge from infinite distance to this point. So there external work is required because this charge will repel this one. So to move it, work should be done by external force. So the electric potential at point P will be positive because the force experienced by this one is a repulsive force opposite the direction of its motion when it moves from infinite distance to this point. But this is an attractive force. That's the reason gravitational potential is negative. So they are saying the gravitational potential on the surface of the planet, which has surface of the mass, spherical shaped mass, its gravitational potential is phi. So it's going to be a negative quantity. So it should be negative side. At r, you can put a dot here. Then at 2r, when it becomes 2r, it's going to be 1 over 2 times minus gm over r. So that is zero point 0.5. Is it 1 over 2 is 0.5. So minus 0.55 because gm over r is 5. So I can put at 2r minus 0.5 a mark on it. Same way when it becomes 3r, the gravitational potential will be V is equal to minus Gm over 3r. So that is going to be minus 1 over 3 Gm over r. Gm over r is 5, already given on the surface of the planet. 1 over 3 is 0.133, yes, 0.33. So minus 0.33 or 0.3 Gm over r, so that will be 5. Okay, so you should mark it at minus 0.35, somewhere here it comes. Same way when it is 4r, it will be, same way if you do it, it will be 0.25 minus. And connect those lines, points, you will get the shape like this. Negative side, it must be. Okay, so next part, that is question number 1, part C. These are the data given. They are saying there's a planet Its radius is 6.4 10 to the power 6 meters. So actually it's Earth. And its mass also telling it mass of the Earth, but they are not using the word Earth. 6 into 10 to the power 24 kilogram. And the question is, a rock of mass 3.4 10 to the power 3 kilogram is moving from point P1, P2. P1, P2 is not mentioned. I included it on my diagram. So they are saying the rock is moving from a distance from the center of mass of the planet 4r to point, the distance becomes 3r. That is P1 to P2 it's moving. OP1 is 4r and OP2 is 3r. Okay, so they asked to find the calculate the change in gravitational potential energy of the rock. So we know that gravitational potential is already told that gravitational potential minus gm over r. So in this gravitational potential, when you keep a mass symbol m, its gravitational potential energy will be given by gravitational potential into mass, that is minus gmm over r. That's the gravitational potential energy. So when this rock moves from P1 to P2, it's losing its gravitational potential energy. But the question is, they asked to find the change in gravitational potential energy. So it's losing the gravitational potential energy means at this point P1, its gravitational potential energy will be larger, and here the gravitational potential energy will be lower. So I can say loss in gravitational potential energy equal gravitational potential energy at this point minus gmm over 4r, because all the distances must be measured from the center of mass of the planet, which creates the gravitational potentials at P1 and P2. In that gravitational potential, this rock is moving, is it? So minus gmm over 4r minus gmm over 3r. Okay, so here I can take common, then minus minus becomes plus. So I can take common like this. Now physics over, now it's maths. I can say g m over r. If I take it within bracket, it will become 1 over 3 minus 1 over 4. So all the values are given, so substitute it. So g, you know that 6.67 10 to the power minus 11. Capital M I use for the planet, that mass is 6 into 10 to the power 24. Symbol M is the mass of the rock, 3.4 10 to the power 3 divided by R is the radius of the planet, that also given 6.4 10 to the power 6 times within bracket 1 over 3 minus 1 over 4. Solve it, you will get the final answer. That is the loss in GP, you will get 1.8 10 to the power 10 joules. Okay, so that's the question number 1, part C, first part. Okay, that's the question number 1, part C, first part I answered. Now, second part, part C, second part, the question is, explain whether the rock speed increases, decreases, or stay the same. We know that when it is moving towards the planet, it's losing the gravitational potential energy. So we assume there are no drag force in the space. So when it moves towards the planet, it's losing the gravitational potential energy. So according to law of conservation of energy, loss in gravitational potential energy will become gain in kinetic energy. So its speed will increase. The answer, the speed will increase because it will become, the loss in GP will become gain in kinetic energy. Okay, question number 2a part. These two equations are given and stated a square box of volume V, that's the volume of the box, contains n molecules of an identical gas. Each molecule has mass m. M is the mass of each molecule. Using the kinetic theory of ideal gas, it can be shown that if all the molecules are moving with speed v, so the average speed, the speed of each molecule is v, at right angle to one face of the box. Okay, they are moving, all the molecules are moving towards one side of the box, one face of the box. The pressure P exerted on the face of the box is given by this expression. They are telling it, right? Then they are saying this expression leads to another formula that relates the pressure and the density with mean square speed. You know that mean square speed. The question is, explain how each of the following terms in equation 2 derived from equation 1. So they are giving three terms. We should explain how the first part, how the density is obtained. So density means, you know, mass over volume. We know that. Mass means Nm. So N is the number of molecules in the given box. M is the mass of a molecule. So Nm is the total mass. Nm is the total mass. So if I take from this equation, P is equal to Nm over V, if I write, right? Okay, actually they would have asked 1/3 about that first, but they are asking it in the second part. I'll explain the second part of the A part, this question. The second part they're asking why 1/3 is coming. So I'll explain that one first. That's easy. So then I'll go to this one, density part. So how 1/3 is appearing? So 1/3 means, now actually equation, you know that PV equal 1/3 mnc square. You would have learned that is the equation, right? So how this 1/3 come? They are giving, this is, in this one all the gas molecules are moving towards one phase in one dimension, but actually in a closed container the gas will move in three dimensions. They'll move this direction, left and right, up and down, and front and back. So there are three different possibilities. So you can ask me, if it is moving at an angle, what? Okay, if it is moving at an angle, we should consider its three dimension, right? We have to consider its components, right? So in three dimension, you can consider the components in different directions. So actually, probability wise, when we consider the probability, we consider if there are n number of molecules, 1/3 of it is moving in one direction, maybe x-axis direction. The other 1/3 is moving in y direction, and the other 1/3 of the gas molecules is moving in direction z, x, y, z, three dimension, right? So that's the reason there is 1/3 count. So that's the answer for second part I'll give. We can say molecules are moving in three dimension, not in one dimension. Therefore, 1/3 of the total molecule will move in one particular direction. That's the answer for the second part. Right, so I explained the second part. So first part, they're asking how the pressure is obtained, how the density is obtained. So you can say density equal mass over volume. Mass means Mn, mass of a molecule into total number of molecules divided by the volume. Mass of a molecule into total number of molecules divided by volume is the density. That's the answer for first one, density. Second one, I already explained how 1/3 is coming. Next one is c squared. What is c squared means? You can see that different molecules have different speed at an instant because they produce collision among them. So you can't expect all the gas particles to have the same speed. So at an instant, we consider the mean square speed. So mean square speed is given by, if there are n molecules at an instant at different speeds such as v1, v2, v3 up to vn. So mean square speed is given by v1 squared plus v2 squared plus up to Vn squared divided by n. That is the mean square speed. Okay. Okay, so question number 2, B part. So these data given for an ideal gas, you know, ideal gas means mainly it won't have any intermolecular force. Yeah, there are some assumptions, you know that. So intermolecular force is not there. So its internal energy is only due to kinetic energy. Okay, so anyway, but they are giving these data, volume of the ideal gas given, pressure of the ideal gas given, temperature given in Celsius. Careful, it should be converted to Kelvin when we are using any equations related to gas. The question is the mass of the gas in the container, somewhere in a closed container, there's a mass of 20.7 grams. What's the mass of one molecule? That's the question. So I need to find the number of molecules inside the container, right? So I can use the equation PV equal NKT. P is the pressure, that is 3 into 10 to the power 5. V is the volume, 6 into 10 to the power minus 3 n times K is the Boltzmann constant, 1.38, 10 to the power minus 23. And careful, temperature should be in Kelvin, so you should add 273 with 17, you will get 290, and find the number of molecules. So number of molecules will be 4.5 10 to the power 23. So the question is, what's the mass of a molecule? So we know the total mass of the gas, 20.7. So mass of a molecule, 20.7 grams divided by number of molecules, 4.5 10 to the power 23. So you will get 4.6 10 to the power minus 23 gram. That's the mass of a molecule. Okay, question number 3 is about something based on thermodynamics. By reference to the first law of thermodynamics, you know the first law of thermodynamics is given by Q equal delta U plus W. So where Q is the heat added to the system, this is the increase in internal energy, and this is the work done by the system. So if you get negative answer for W, that means work done on the system. That means if you get delta U negative value, that means decrease in internal energy. Normally that can be defined in either way. Some books they say W as a work done on the system. Some books they say work done by the system. But anyway, if I say this is the heat added to the system, so actually you know first law of thermodynamics is about conservation of energy. First law of thermodynamics is about conservation of energy. So this is the heat added to the system. So when you add heat to the system, internal energy will increase. So it can be increase in kinetic energy or increase in potential energy. You know, potential energy of the system is due to intermolecular force, and kinetic energy is due to motion or vibration. If it is solid, there will be vibrations among the molecules or vibration of the molecules. If it is a gas particle, it can be the motion, right? That's the internal energy. Sum of the kinetic energy and potential energy is the internal energy. And W is the work done. So whenever something is expanding, the system will do work. Say if it is a solid or gas, whatever it is, when it expands, we say system is doing work. If it is compressed, work is done on the system. So in this equation, Q is the heat added to the system. So when you add heat, the internal energy will increase. So delta U is the increase in internal energy. And this is, so when you add energy, so the internal energy will increase, so it might expand. So W is work done by the system. Work done by the system that happens whenever it expands, whether it's a gas or solid. When it expands, it will do around the surrounding, on the surrounding. So work done by the system, right? So they are saying by state and explain the change, if any, in the internal energy of a lump of solid lead as it melts at constant temperature. So if it is melting at constant temperature, normally you know the change in volume we don't consider. When ice melts and becomes liquid, okay, solid lead, when it becomes liquid, melts, we don't consider much about the change in volume. So no change in volume means no expansion, no contraction. So the W will become equal to 0, right? So no work done. So the temperature is remaining constant, they are saying. So temperature remaining constant means the kinetic energy is not changing. So that means all the heat we supplied is used to break the bonds. That means whenever bonds are broken, the potential energy will increase. When you apply heat and when the intermolecular force is broken, the internal energy will increase. What type of energy will increase? That will be the increase in potential energy. So the temperature increases when the kinetic energy of the molecules increase. So here, you know, latent. So it's happening at constant temperature. So no change in kinetic energy, only the potential energy is increasing. So the answer should be We can say first about W, no change in volume. So work done by the system, by the system is equal to 0. We can say that. Then we can say that you will get 1 mark. No work is done by the system because no change in volume, right? Negligible change in volume. Heat is supplied to the system, so internal energy will increase. Since the temperature remains constant, the internal energy increase is due to increase in potential energy. So these are the 3 marks you will get it, right? No change in volume, so work done is equal to 0. Since heat is supplied, internal energy will increase, and the increase in internal energy is increase in potential energy and no change in kinetic energy. Okay, so the big part, they are saying some gas in a toy balloon when the balloon bursts and no thermal energy enters or leaves the gas. So we need to explain about the change in internal energy of some gas in a toy balloon when the balloon bursts and no thermal energy enters or leaves the gas. Actually, this is called adiabatic process, but that word we don't use much. Adiabatic process. Anyway, so what's happening? They are saying no heat is enters or leaves the balloon. That means Q equal 0. Remember that. So that means Q equal 0. So actually in this equation, all these three quantities are taken positive. That means Q is positive. That means heat is added to the system. In case any calculation, but you won't get much about it. In case if you get Q negative value, that means heat is lost from the system. Same way, delta U, we take it positive here, increase in internal energy. We take it in case if you get delta U negative, that means decrease in internal energy. Here also W is taken positive in this equation. So W is taken as work done by the system, that is positive quantity. In case if you get negative answer for W, that means work done on the system. That means compressing, right? So here they are saying no heat is lost, or they are saying in this question, when the balloon bursts, no thermal energy enters or leaves the system means Q equals 0. So if Q equals 0, now look at here, when the balloon bursts, it expands. The gas is expanding. Whenever something expands, it will do work on the surrounding. So work done by the system has a positive value because the gas is expanding. So W is going to be positive quantity in this situation when the balloon bursts. So work done by the system is there, which is positive quantity. So this is 0. No heat is added or no heat is enters or leaves. W is work done by the gas when it expands has a positive value. So when you substitute here 0 equal delta U plus W. So W is a positive quantity. When I bring it to the left, you will get delta U is going to be a negative quantity, negative delta. So the delta U is getting a negative value, is it? So that means here positive value means increase in internal energy. Negative value means decrease in internal energy. Okay, so internal energy is decreasing when the gas is expanding. So what will happen when the internal energy decreases? Temperature can drop. Okay, the temperature will drop when the internal energy decreases. Okay, so the answer should be here. The answer should be uh, since no heat is entering or no heat is leaving, Q is equal to 0. Since there's an increase in volume or rapid increase in volume, uh, W work is done by the system in the surrounding. So uh, internal energy will decrease. Internal energy will decrease. Those are the 3 marks you are getting. Work is done by the system. Q is equal to 0. Therefore, internal energy will decrease. If you ask me why internal energy is decreasing, this is the explanation. Okay, but you don't need to write. Mark scheme is not expecting these equations to use. Simply they are giving 3 points. They are saying when the gas suddenly expands, work is done by the gas due to increase in volume. So internal energy is decreasing. These are the 3 points the Mark scheme is given. Okay, question number 4. There are a dish which is obtained from a hollow glass sphere. So a small marble or some small solid ball of mass 45 grams is kept. So it's going to oscillate on either side, and the graph is given, displacement time graph is given, right? So they're asking the motion of the ball in the dish is simple harmonic with its acceleration, and it follows this equation. It's given in the paper. So G is the gravitational acceleration of free fall, and capital R is a constant that depends on the radius of the dish and the ball, right? So it's a constant actually for the given system. The first part is use figure 4.2, that is the graph, to find the frequency of oscillation of the ball. So simple, you can find the period, you know, this is time axis. So you can get the time period from the graph. So that time period, you will get it, that will be equal to 2.2 seconds. So the question is find the frequency of angular frequency of the oscillation they are asking. So we know that omega equal 2 pi over t, 2 pi over 2.2. So you will get it 2.9 radian per second. Second part, use the information in A to determine R. So you know that they are saying this is simple harmonic motion. So we part first part. So I can say A equal minus G over R times X. So I can compare this with equation A equal minus omega squared X. So that means omega squared should be equal to G over R, because G is constant, R is constant. So I can say omega equal to square root of G over R. The question is they asked to find the value of R. So we know the omega, we found it, so 2.9. Substitute G 9.81, you can find the R. So you will get R, that will be 1.2 meter. Okay, 1.2 meter. Right. Calculate the speed of the ball as it passes over the center C of the dish. So center C of the dish, that's going to be the equilibrium position of this oscillation. So that is will be the maximum speed. So we can find the maximum speed at the equilibrium position, and C is the equilibrium position. We know that speed at C is going to be omega x naught. That's the maximum speed, omega x naught. So x naught is the amplitude. So they are saying initially it was held at a distance of 3 centimeters. So in simple harmonic motion, whether it's a spring mass system or any oscillation like that, if you pull the system from equilibrium position through a particular distance and leave it, during the oscillation, that will be the amplitude. Say for example, even a spring mass system, spring is attached to a mass. So it will extend and it will come to the equilibrium position. So this is the equilibrium position. So from this equilibrium position, if you pull this mass further down through 3 centimeter and leave it, it will oscillate such that the amplitude of oscillation will be 3 centimeter. Okay, so from the equilibrium position, through what distance you pull this oscillator and leave it, that is going to be the amplitude of oscillation. So here they are saying it was pulled through 3 centimeter from the C initially 3 centimeter and leave it. So it was left from 3 centimeter, means during the oscillation amplitude will be 3 centimeter. So x naught will be 3 centimeters. So we know the omega. Omega is equal to, we found it 2.9. So that will be 2.9 times 3 centimeter. 3 into 10 to the power minus 2. So solve it, you'll get the answer 0.087 meter per second. It's another common question. Students ask, how do I know the unit of R is meter? So you know the unit of A is meter per second square. Yeah, this is meter per second square. This is meter. This is already meter per second square. This unit also meter per second square, is it? So left and right, you know, on the either side of the equal sign should have the same unit. So this is meter per second square. This is meter per second square. This is meter. So this should be meter. Then this meter and this meter will get cancelled. Then this and this will have the same unit on either side of the equal sign. Okay, question number 4C part. Some moisture collects on the surface of the dish so that the motion of the ball becomes lightly damped. On the axis 4.2, so they are giving the graph. So on the given graph, draw the line to show lightly damped motion of the ball for the first 5 seconds. Okay, I did it for completely up to first 5 seconds. So that means up to here, right? So first 5 seconds, after that they asked to draw it means, you know, during light damping, important you must know the period of oscillation remains the same. Okay, the period of oscillation will not change during light damping, but only thing, the amplitude will gradually decrease. So the graph, the black color graph is the given graph, right, given on the question paper. Blue color graph is when its oscillation decreases, or when when it has light damping. So the only thing, the amplitude should gradually decrease. So compared to this small amplitude, you can draw it on the graph nicely on your paper. So the amplitude should gradually decrease, but the period remains the same. Okay, so the amplitude becomes smaller gradually. The period remains the same. Okay, that's the answer for C part. Okay, question number 5. It's about ultrasound scanning. Question number 5, it's about ultrasound scanning. You know, how do they produce ultrasound? There's a special type of crystal called piezoelectric crystal, quartz crystal, piezoelectric crystal. So when those crystals are compressed or stretched, you know, charges will be induced on on opposite faces, right? So when the charge is induced, and if that crystal is connected in a complete circuit, you can get EMF across the opposite faces of the crystal. Whenever you are compressing or stretching the quartz crystal or the piezoelectric crystal, uh, charges will be induced. The opposite type of charges will be induced. Say if it is a two-dimensional crystal, if you compress or stretches, one side will become negative and the other one will become positive. The charges will be induced on the crystal. So if you connect it to a circuit, the current will flow. If you connect it to a circuit, you can make current to flow through it. Okay. So the same way, when you compress or stretch, either way, during that time, the charges will be developed and EMF will be induced across the ends. So how to compress and stretch them? You can use even longitudinal wave like sound. Okay, whenever longitudinal wave hits on the crystal, and if the crystal is fixed, whenever the compression comes or rarefaction comes, the crystal will be compressed and released. So there will be opposite type of charges will be induced in opposite side. Okay, so the question is, explain the principle of detection of ultrasound waves for medical diagnosis. So what happens, the ultrasound will be emitted as pulses and it will reflect back from the bound of the two media, and this reflected wave will uh, hit or will incident with the quartz crystal, and the quartz crystal will be uh, compressed and released, or we can say the planes of the atomic planes of the quartz crystal will start to oscillate. When they start to oscillate, EMF will be induced across the opposite faces of the crystal. So you can say ultrasound will be emitted as pulses and it will reflect back from the boundary of two different media, from the point where it's where the ultrasound is hitting the boundary. From that it will reflect back. This reflected ultrasound will incident with the quartz crystal or piezoelectric crystal, and the crystal will be compressed and released. So there will be oscillation of atomic planes. That oscillation will induce EMF across the ends of the or across the opposite faces of the crystal, right? So by using that induced EMF, we can detect the ultrasound. Okay, question number 5, B part. By reference to specific acoustic impedance, explain why there is a very little transmission of ultrasound waves from air to skin. Okay, so what is this uh, reflection coefficient means? Say, for example, this is the boundary of two different media, right? So this is medium 1, this is medium 2. So ultrasound is approaching this boundary, and if I say the intensity of the ultrasound approaching is II, or incident ultrasound is II, and part of it will pass through the boundary to the next medium, and another fraction of it will reflect back. So reflected ultrasound intensity, let it be IR. Okay, so how much of ultrasound will reflect, how much of ultrasound will pass into the second medium is decided by the reflection coefficient, that is given by intensity of the reflected wave or reflected ultrasound divided by intensity of the incident ultrasound. So depending if this has, say for example, if it is 100%, that means all the ultrasound will reflect back. So depending on this value, we can decide will the ultrasound reflect a lot or will it penetrate into the second medium mostly. Okay, also mathematically we can show that this is given by Z1 minus Z2 all things squared over Z1 plus Z2 all things squared. Okay, what are the Z1, Z2? They are called acoustic impedance. Acoustic impedance is given by density of the medium into speed of ultrasound in that medium, right? So this is the acoustic impedance, density of the medium into speed of the ultrasound in that medium, and the reflection coefficient, that is actually intensity of the reflected wave divided by intensity of the incident wave, that is equal to Z1 minus Z2. So this first medium, the acoustic impedance Z1, this is Z2. So that means Z2 means density of this medium times speed of the ultrasound in this medium. So same way here, density of this medium in the speed of the ultrasound, right? So what happens here when we consider if the difference is larger, the acoustic impedance between the first medium and second medium, the acoustic impedance, if it is much difference among them, the alpha will have a larger value. That means most of the ultrasound will reflect back. So the question here, by reference to specific acoustic impedance, C is the specific acoustic impedance. So explain why there's very little transmission of ultrasound waves from air to skin. So actually, when we consider air and skin, say when you consider ultrasound scanning, the outer body, this is the body outer surface, we keep the probe here. So here, outer there can be air layer here. To remove that, they put gel, is it? So this is the internal organ. This is the body, human body. Okay, so when you consider air and the skin, the problem is air and the skin, the acoustic impedance has big difference. Okay, air and the skin has a big difference for the acoustic impedance. So because of that reason, most of the ultrasound will reflect back because the coefficient of reflection will have larger value because Z1 minus Z2 will have a big value. Air and the skin, the acoustic impedance has larger value. So we normally put gel here. When gel is put, what happened? The gel and the body, when you consider, they have almost same acoustic impedance, so the reflection will become so almost same acoustic impedance for gel and body means this quantity will become smaller, so alpha will become smaller. Alpha becomes smaller means IR, intensity of the reflected ultrasound, will become smaller. So most of the ultrasound will penetrate into the body. So the question, answer for this question, it's a 3-mark question. First mark, we can say the specific acoustic impedance of air and skin has big difference. Therefore, the coefficient, reflection coefficient will have larger value, and hence most of the ultrasound will reflect back from the outer surface of the human body and will not penetrate inside. These are the 3 points to get 3 marks. Okay, question number 6. Telephone signals may be transmitted either by means of optic fiber or by means of wire pair. State the advantages of use of optic fiber. So you know optical fibers have larger bandwidth. Second, you can say they have less noise, and third, you can say there will be less attenuation. You know, attenuation means losing the energy when it travels longer distance. So these are the 3 points: greater bandwidth, less noise, and less attenuation. Okay, B part. It is proposed to transmit a signal over a distance of 4.5 10 to the power 3 kilometer by means of an optic fiber. The input signal power is given 9.8 milliwatts, and the minimum signal that can be detected at the output has a power of 6.3 10 to the power minus 17 watts. So that's a minimum power that can be detected at the output of the optical fiber. For this signal power, the signal to noise ratio is 21 decibel. Calculate the power of the background noise. Okay, so you know that signal to noise ratio is given by in decibels. Signal to noise ratio is given by 10 times log of power of the signal divided by power of the noise. That equation you must know. So signal to noise ratio is given by 10 log power of the signal divided by power of the noise. So signal to noise ratio is given as 21 equal to 10 log power of the signal, that's the minimum power of the output signal, is given as 6.3 10 to the power minus 17. I need to find the power of the noise. That's the question. Is it for this signal? So they're asking for this signal, means to get this is the minimum output signal, power of the output signal. To have that, what can be the power of the noise? So solve it, you know, both sides, divide these, take inverse log, and if you solve it, you will get the answer 5 into 10 to the power minus 19 watts. That's the B part, first part. Okay, so question number 6, part B, second part. The maximum attenuation per unit length of the optic fiber that allows for uninterrupted transmission signal. So we need to find the maximum attenuation per unit length, right? So we know that attenuation in decibels is given by, in decibels is given by 10 log input power. We can put P in or P1 over output power. Okay, so that is, we can find the input power is given 9.8 milliwatts, 9.8 10 to the power minus 3 divided by the minimum output power. We know that 6.3 10 to the power minus 17. So you will get for that 141.2 decibels. And we know that attenuation per unit length is given by attenuation per unit length is given by attenuation in decibels. Attenuation in decibels divided by length. Length should be in kilometer. Normally we give it in attenuation per unit length per kilometer. So we should consider the length in kilometer. So this is 141.2 decibels divided by the length is given 4.5 10 to the power 3 kilometers. So that will be 0.032 decibels per kilometer. Okay, so it's a metal sphere. Question number 7. It's a metal sphere, and electric fields. It's a charged metal sphere. You know, charges remain on outer surface of the metal sphere. This graph, electric field strength, is given with distance. Distance is measured from the center of the sphere, and you can see the electric field strength is 0 up to 4.5 centimeter. You know, inside metal, the electric field strength is equal to 0. Why? What's the reason? The reason is now when you keep, when a metal, say imagine a metal block is charged, what happens? The charges will stay on the outer surface of it, and inside the metal, there will be opposite type of charge. So if it is charged negatively here, inside there will be positive charge, and this side will have a negative charge. So what happens inside, it will produce an opposite type of electric field to cancel the electric field inside the metal. So always inside a metal, the electric field strength will be 0 because there will be opposite field will be induced inside. So that will cancel the external electric field. And also we can say always the charges stay on the outer surface of the metal sphere. So inside electric field strength is 0. That means up to 4.5 centimeter, the electric field strength is 0 means the radius is equal to 4.5 centimeter. Until the surface, the electric field strength from inside to until the surface, the electric field strength is 0. The question first part, state what is meant by electric field strength. So you can say force per unit positive charge. Is it force per unit positive charge is defined as the electric field strength E equal F over Q, is it? But Q should be a positive charge. B part, first part, use figure 7.2, that is 7.2 is this graph, to determine the radius R of the sphere. So I already told that. So when you consider a sphere inside, the electric field strength will be 0. So up to 4.5, the electric field strength is 0. So there's nothing to calculate. Actually, from the graph, we can say R is equal to 4.5 centimeter since electric field strength is 0 up to 4.5 centimeter. Or you can say inside a metal, electric field strength will be equal to 0. So up to 4.5 centimeter, electric field strength is 0. Therefore, the radius is 4.5 centimeter. B part, second part, the question is use figure 7.2 to determine the charge capital Q on the sphere. So I can use this data. You can read it from the graph. So I can say E equal Q over 4 pi epsilon naught R squared. So I'm answering question number 17. B part, second part. So electric field strength, you can read it from the graph. That is 18 into 10 to the power 5 equal Q over 4 pi epsilon naught, you know the value, 8.85 10 to the power minus 12 into the distance from the center, that is 4.5 centimeters. So 4.5 10 to the power minus 2 all things squared. Solve it and find the Q. That will be 4.05 10 to the power minus 7 coulomb. That's the charge of the sphere. Okay, so C part, An alpha particle is situated a distance 8 centimeter from the center of the sphere. So 8 centimeter from the center of sphere. You can read from the graph, get the value of electric field strength at 8 centimeter, right? Read it from the graph. So you will get at say 8 centimeter, the electric field strength, you will get 5.75, 10 to the power 5, you will get it. The question is, calculate the acceleration of the alpha particle when it is kept at 8 centimeter from the center of the sphere. So acceleration means, you know, F equal ma. I need to find the force first. So alpha particle consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. So its charge is plus 2e, right? 2 times of electronic charge. So I can first find F equal QE. So charge of the alpha particle is 2 times 1.6 10 to the power minus 19 into the electric field strength. Find it from the graph at 8 centimeter, that is 5.75 10 to the power 5 Newton. So you will get 1.84 10 to the power minus 30 Newton. That's the force acting on the alpha particle. Then I can say F equal ma. So the force I know 1.84 10 to the power minus 13. You know, alpha particle consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Mass of a proton is almost equal to mass of a neutron. So mass of the alpha particle will be equal to 4 times mass of proton. Mass of proton given in the first page, the data sheet. So 4 times mass of proton 1.66 10 to the power minus 27, right? 4 times mass of proton, because proton consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Mass of proton is almost equal to mass of neutron. So 4 times this into A. So solve it, you will get the acceleration, initial acceleration, that is 2.8 10 to the power 13 meter per second square. Okay, question number 8 is about operational amplifier. An ideal operational amplifier is connected to a load resistor. You know, ideal operational amplifier has certain characteristics. You know, input impedance is infinite, output impedance is almost zero, and the gain, the voltage gain is very high. We can take it infinity or very high. And also, one of the another property is it does not depend on frequency. The gain does not depend on frequency, but practical amplifier has change in gain depending on the frequency. But for this one, we say bandwidth of operational amplifier. Bandwidth of operational amplifier means what will be the gain for a particular range of input frequencies. But for ideal operational amplifier, the output or the gain does not depend on the range of frequencies. So for all frequencies, the gain will be the same, almost infinity or very high. So that the reason we call for ideal operational amplifier, the bandwidth is infinity. So the answer should be, what is meant by infinite bandwidth means constant gain for all frequency of the input signal. That's the answer for the A part, first part of the A part, question number 8. Okay, so A part, second part, state the effect, if any, on the output voltage of increasing the load resistance. Actually, you know, it does not change. The output voltage does not depend on the load resistance. So the answer should be, there is no change or unchanged, right? Now, B part, this circuit diagram is given. So explain why point P is known as virtual earth. So we say this is as loop, open loop. We consider this part. So the output of this open loop is actually, we can say, the gain of the open loop is equal to gain is of the A naught. We can say open loop. Gain is given by the difference of the input voltages. So V plus minus V minus, that's the input voltage, divided by output voltage. So the gain is given by output voltage divided by the difference of the input voltages. So for open loop gain is almost infinity. So very high, we can say almost, it's actually very high, or we can take it as uh, almost infinite. So if it is almost infinite, that means this one, that is the difference between the difference between the inputs of the inverting input and the non-inverting input, that is V plus minus V minus, approximately equal to 0. That means V plus almost equal to V minus, that is the input voltage at the non-inverting terminal will be almost equal to input voltage of the inverting terminal. But we know that the non-inverting terminal is connected to earth. Earth means the voltage is 0. So the voltage is 0 for non-inverting input, but the voltage of the non-inverting input is almost equal to voltage at the inverting input because the gain is very high. Therefore, here also the voltage should be 0. The point P is connected to that point. So this point is not connected to earth, but its voltage also 0. Looks like it's virtually connected to earth. That's the reason at point P the voltage is also equal to 0. So we can say like this, open loop gain. Open loop gain is very high. This is the open loop gain. So since open loop gain is very high, operation amplifier amplifies the difference of the two inputs. So it's very high. So that means second mark they are telling, therefore this is equal to 0 because it's almost infinity, means we are dividing it by a very high, very small number, is it? You are dividing output by a very small number, that's give the gain very high. So V plus minus V minus should be almost equal to 0 because this is very high. So for that you are getting the second mark. Therefore V plus equal V minus, and then you should say V plus is equal to 0 because the non-inverting terminal is connected to earth. Therefore V minus also will be equal to 0. Looks like it's connected to earth, but it is not connected to earth. Therefore it's virtual earth point. Okay, so the marks can be given for this is 1 mark for saying very high. Therefore this is equal to 0. Then V plus equal to 0 since it's connected to earth. Therefore V minus also equal to 0. Okay, that was the answer for B part first part. Now B part second part. B part second part, the question is calculate the potential at Q. This is the point Q mark given on the diagram. Calculate the potential at Q. Okay, so this point is connected to earth, means this also 0 volt. So this voltage is divided across 110 ohms and 40 ohms at the ratio of the resistance. So if I find the voltage across it, this voltage is 0, so I can find the voltage at Q. So the total input voltage, the 1.5, will be divided across these two resistors at the ratio of their resistance. So I can use potential divider method if I use ratio of the resistance. So I can say voltage at Q is equal to, that's the voltage across 40 ohms, but this end is at 0 volts. So potential difference means equal to potential at Q. So I'm finding the potential at Q, that is actually equal to potential difference, but this point is equal to 0, the voltage. So the total input voltage times that resistance over the total resistance 110 plus 40. So the answer will be 0.40 volt. That's the voltage of point Q. So if the point Q is voltage 0.40 voltage, the point Q is equal to 0 volt. So the voltage across 110 kilo ohms should be equal to 0.40. The potential difference of voltage across 110 kilo ohms will be this voltage minus this voltage. This is 0 volt, that is equal to 150. That also should be 0.4 volt. So third part, the question is at a temperature of 13 degrees Celsius, the resistance of the thermistor T is 230 kilo ohms. Okay, so they are giving the 13 degrees Celsius, the resistance of the thermistor T is 230 kilo ohm, so 230 kilo ohm. So you know that there's a negative feedback. Is it negative feedback means a fraction of the output will be fed back to the inverting input is called negative feedback. So during negative feedback, there are some advantages. The stability increases, the frequency, the change in gain due to temperature or change in gain due to frequency, they all will be stabilized when you have negative feedback. Also, you can reduce the gain because open loop gain is infinity, but infinity means, even if you apply a very small voltage, it can go to the saturation region. You would have learned those things. To avoid it, we should have a negative feedback. So here, this is the negative feedback resistance, right? So I can compare this circuit with our normal negative feedback with inverting input circuits. Like this is minus, this is plus, this is connected to earth. So we take the output across this V out, and this is the input signal across this resistance R1. This is the feedback resistor R2. Okay, so here this is the input voltage, and we know all of you learned that the gain here, this is called closed loop. Closed loop gain. Closed loop means whenever there is a feedback, negative feedback, we call closed loop. Without negative feedback, it's called open loop gain. So this is a closed loop gain because input is applied here, output is here, there's a negative feedback. So there the gain is given by minus R2 over R1. That is, R2 is the feedback resistor. So here also we can use that idea. You know the equation, this one, right? You can use this directly if you want. The next part, at 13 degrees Celsius, resistance of the thermistor is 230 kilo ohms. Show that the potential difference measured with the voltmeter, that means the output they are asking. Potential difference means this potential is zero. So this is the output voltage V out. So the potential difference of the voltmeter is equal to V out. Output voltage, I should find it. So this is the gain. That means gain means output voltage over input voltage. So input voltage is applied across the inverting input. So here also input voltage is applied from Q, right? Q is the input voltage applied. So here the voltage is zero, right? So here this is the R1. You can imagine 150 kilo ohm as R1. So I can replace these parts. Not necessary because I know the voltage at Q. That is the voltage what we consider here is V in. This is zero. Here this is zero. Compare that with both standard circuit. What you learn with this circuit, compare it. This is 0 volt. Here this is 0 volt. This is the input voltage. So I can call this V in. This point, the voltage is V in. So same way, this voltage is input 0.4 volt. This is the feedback resistor R2. So the whole resistance, so both together is the feedback resistor. I can call it as R2. This is R1. This is R1. Okay. So the question is they asked to find the V out. So actually now you can see both are the same. But this voltage is this one. This is 0. This is 0. Compare it. So I can use the same thing to find the V out here. So I can say V out to find. I can say the voltage gain. So I'm answering now third part, B part. So the gain is equal to V out, this voltage across the output terminal and the earth, V out over V in equal minus R2 over R1, standard equation. So anyway, it's going to be negative because inverting input, the input is given. So I can call this negative, but I don't need to consider the negative sign because we know it's an inverting input is the we are applying input to the inverting terminal. Okay, so I don't need to consider the minus sign when I do the calculation. So V out over V in 0.40, we already calculated it. R2 at the two resistors. So 230 plus 100, 330 kilo ohms, 330 kilo ohms. I can keep it in kilo because R1 also in kilo. So I can keep it kilo ohms over R1 150 kilo ohms. Solve it, you will get the V out. Okay, so you will get the V out. That will be 0.88 volt. That's the voltmeter reading. Okay, this is one method. Same thing actually, but looks like different. Second method, I can approach without using this equation, without using the equation for the gain, without using that equation for the gain. I can use by using current method, right? So by using current also I can solve this. This is the first method. Second method I can consider like this, the same question, same part. We know the input current. So here I can say input current I1, the feedback current IF, the feedback current IF, right? So I'll raise these parts. 1 minute. Okay, so second method I can do like this. You know, this is the input current I1, this is the feedback current IF. So at point P, the voltage is 0, and you know that for open loop circuit. So when I consider this part, that's open loop without considering the feedback. The input impedance of the operation amplifier is very high. So there won't be any current flow towards or into the inverting input. So the current, this I1 plus IF must be equal to 0. That is I1 is going to be minus IF. Minus sign, you know, that's a feedback current, so negative feedback, so that's the reason it's negative sign. Okay, I1 means the potential difference across Q and P decides the current I1. So the potential difference across Q and P, the potential at P is 0 volt, potential at Q is 0.40 volt. So I1 equal to potential difference between Q and P, that is I can say VQP over the resistance. I can call this R1, or I can say 150 times 10 to the power 3 equal to, minus sign I can leave it. This feedback is, that is this voltage, that means that is going to be the voltage across these 2 points. Means this current is due to the voltage across this point and this point, because current is fed back from here. So this voltage is V out. So I can say V out minus VP. V out minus VP, that's a voltage across this point and this point. Even this I can write VQ minus VP. That's the voltage or potential difference. This potential difference, V out minus VP over the total resistance, 330 kilo ohms into 10 to the power 3, I can say, but anyway, 10 to the power 3 will get cancelled. Okay, so this I can write VQ is 0.40, VP is 0 volt. Already we answered that first part, virtually earth connected that virtual point earth. So that's going to be 150 equal VO minus 0 against VP is 0, it's a virtually earth point, and this is 330. Solve it, you will get the V out. Same answer, you will get it 0.88 volt. Okay, so the C part of question number 8, the resistance of the thermistor decreases as its temperature rises. Explain the effect of this change in the temperature on the potential difference measured with the voltmeter. So you know that, so I can make the same thing, VQ minus VP. I can write it as VQ, C part, VQ over 150 kilo ohms is going to be V out over the total resistance, 100 plus resistance of the thermistor. Resistance of the thermistor, is it? Okay, so what happens when the temperature increases, resistance of the thermistor will decrease, so RT will decrease. No change in VQ. VQ is the same depending on these two resistance. So VQ has no change. 150 ohms has no change. When the temperature increases, RT will decrease. So when you cross multiply, V out will decrease. So the output voltage will decrease. Okay, question number 9. So this is the path of an electron in a magnetic field. So initially it's moving straight, and when it enters into magnetic field, uh, it's changing its direction. You know that it changes its direction due to force, the magnetic force acting on it. So first part, state and explain the direction of the magnetic field. So you know the electron is a negatively charged particle. When a negatively charged part, whenever there's a flow of charges, there'll be current flow, because according to the definition of current, rate of flow of charge is current, is it? So whenever even one electron moves, there is rate of flow of charge, there'll be current flow. But the direction of the current flow is defined as, for negative charges, opposite the direction of motion. So electron is moving this way. The direction of the motion of the electron is given from left to right. So current flow, if I consider a point here, the current flow is opposite to the direction of motion of the negative charge. And also it's curving like that. Whenever a charged particle moves in magnetic field, it will experience a magnetic force given by F equal BQB sine theta. So theta is the angle between its direction of velocity and the direction of magnetic field. So the force will be always in right angle, perpendicular to the direction of the velocity, as well as it will be in right angle to the direction of the magnetic field. So the force will act as the centripetal force for the moving charged particle in magnetic field. So it will move on a circular path inside a magnetic field. So here the charged particle is moving like this, means it should have a centripetal force towards the center of this curved path. So somewhere here the force should act, that is the magnetic force, this way. Okay, so I can use Fleming's left-hand rule to find the direction of the magnetic field. So use the Fleming's left-hand rule. Thumb indicates the direction of the force. Current is applied opposite to the direction of motion. That's the direction of the current. So the index finger is pointing into the board. So direction of the magnetic field is into the paper. So you should tell the answer. 2 marks question. They asked to state and explain. So you should give the explanation. You should say the direction of the force. You can mark it on the diagram. So you can say the direction of the force is towards the center of the curved path, because it's the centripetal force. Direction of the current is towards left, opposite to the direction of velocity. Okay, then you can say, according to Fleming's left-hand rule, magnetic field is directed into the page. Okay, right. Second part of question number 9a part, showed that the speed v of the electron is 9 into 10 to the power 6 meter per second. So here they are, initially you can see the first paragraph, initially the electron is traveling at right angle to the magnetic field. So they are making theta 90 degree here. So sine 90 equal to 1. So they are telling that it's entering at 90 degree to the magnetic field. So second part, they asked to find the speed of the electron. So they are theta equal 90 degrees. So I can say F equal BQB sine theta, that is sine 91. And that is going to be mv squared over what I already told that it's going to be the centripetal force. So they asked to find the speed. So we can say speed is equal to dq r over m. Speed is the question. So bqr over m. So magnetic field strength is given 8 into 10 to the power minus 4. Charge of the electron 1.6, 10 to the power minus 19. Radius of the curved path given 6.4 centimeters, 6.4, 10 to the power minus 2 over mass of the electron, that's given in the data sheet, 9.11, 10 to the power minus 31. Solve it. You'll get the speed, that will be 9.0, 10 to the power 6 meter per second. Right. Okay, so B part, question number 9, they are giving this diagram and they are saying in this region both electric field and magnetic field is there, the same magnetic field as earlier, but Now electric field also applied here. So now the electron is moving on a straight line without changing its direction. So the first part, mark with an arrow the direction of the uniform electric field inside this region. So earlier we know that when the electron enters into the magnetic field, it experiences a force downward direction, is it? That's the reason it starts to bend. So to balance that force, the electron should experience an electrostatic force upward direction. So if you consider the electron, we already know it has magnetic force downwards. So to balance it, it should have electrostatic force upwards. How do I know magnetic force is downwards? Because it was bent like this. So when it enters into the magnetic field, so initially it's experiencing force vertically down, and every time the magnetic force is acting perpendicular to the direction of the velocity, right? So when it enters, at that moment the force is vertically downwards, the magnetic force is downwards. To balance it, the electrostatic force should be upward direction, then it will move without it changing the direction of motion. So it's a negatively charged particle. Electron is a negatively charged particle. It should experience electrostatic force upwards, means, always negatively charged particles experience electrostatic force opposite to the direction of field lines. Positive charged particle experience electrostatic force along the direction of field lines. So the electron is experiencing electrostatic force upward, means the electric field should be opposite to the electrostatic force on the negatively charged electron. So the electric field should be downwards. Okay, that's the first part, B part. B part, second part, use the data from A to calculate the magnitude of the electric field strength. So I can say the magnetic force is balanced by electrostatic force. That's the reason it's moving on a straight line. So the magnetic force is given by BQV is equal to electrostatic force F equal QE. So Q and Q will get cancelled. So B times the speed is equal to electric field strength. So I can find electric field strength. I know the magnetic field strength, that is given 8 into 10 to the power minus 4, and speed we already calculated 9 into 10 to the power 6. So the electric field strength will be 7.2 into 10 to the power 3 Newton per coulomb. And C part. Now the question C part, the electron in B is now replaced by an alpha particle traveling at the same speed. So now alpha particle, earlier electron, now alpha particle traveling at the same speed as this one, same speed, along the same initial path as electron. Describe and explain the shape of the path in the region of the magnetic and electric field. So when it passes through both this region, which consists of both electric field and magnetic field. So through this region, when the alpha particle passes or enters, what will happen to its path? You know that finally we got this expression VV equal E. So to this condition satisfied from here, we got this expression from here. This is obtained from here. This condition for what? To move on straight line. On straight line, or to show no deflection, is it? To move on straight line, this must be satisfied. When this satisfied, this should be satisfied. That means it does not depend on the charge. It depends only on the speed of the particle when you keep same B and E as here. So alpha particle also passing through the same magnetic field as earlier, same electric field, same speed. So this equation is independent of charge and mass. Therefore, alpha particle will move on a straight line without changing any direction. So answer should be given like this. When to move through the electric field and magnetic field combination on a straight line, the condition must be BV equal E, and it is independent of mass and charge of the particle. Therefore, since alpha particle is traveling at the same earlier speed as the electron, it also will move along a straight line. Okay, question 10 is about Again, magnetic field and transformer, it's mainly depends, question seems to be like the theory. Normally they ask this question. State Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction, you know, induced EMF is directly proportional to rate of change of magnetic flux linkage, right? That's the answer for the A part, question number 10. B part, a transformer diagram is given. It's a step-up transformer because you can see the number of turns on the output is more than the number of turns in the primary coil. State one function of a transformer, you can say to increase or decrease the input voltage, AC voltage. To increase or decrease the AC voltage, we can use transformers. The second part, B part, question number 10, a sinusoidal alternating current in the primary coil gives rise to the varying magnetic flux linking the secondary coil. Use Faraday's law to explain why output from the transformer is an alternative for AC voltage. Okay, you can say the primary, you are giving AC voltage, so you can say due to AC voltage in the primary coil, there will be AC current, the direction of the current will continuously change. Therefore, the magnetic flux produced in the primary coil also will continuously change. This magnetic flux will pass through the iron core to the secondary coil. So the magnetic flux linkage with the secondary coil will continuously change and there will be induced voltage. Since the rate of change of flux linkage continuously changes, the induced EMF also will continuously change. Then you can say when the direction of the change in flux changes or reverses, the direction of the induced EMF or the polarity of the induced voltage also will change, and that will cause or that will produce AC voltage in the input. Third part, state why the soft iron core of the transformer is laminated. You know, if you don't laminated means you normally make it as small strips and cover it. So the reason why should it be laminated, because to avoid eddy current. If there is eddy current, there will be heat produced in the iron core. Because of the heat, some of the input power or energy will be wasted. So to avoid it, we should reduce the eddy current. Okay, question number 11. It's about the valence band, conduction band, and forbidden gap. So when you consider conductors, the valence band and conduction band, they partially overlap. They overlap. Okay, this is the valence band. And this is the conduction band. This is for conductors or metals, right? When you consider semiconductors, there will be gap between the conduction band and the valence band. This is called forbidden gap. So, but electrons can be excited from valence band to conduction band by using thermal excitation or by using heat. This is for semiconductors. If you consider insulators, also they look like the same, but the forbidden gap is very big. Okay, this is valence band, this is conduction band. So the gap is very large for insulators. So you can't excite the electrons. The energy what we give by using heat is not enough to excite the electron from valence band to conduction band. So when you heat a metal, there is no change in free electrons. So what we say free electrons or delocalized electrons are the number of electrons per meter cube in conduction band. When it comes to semiconductors, when you heat, the electrons will be excited from valence band to conduction band. So charge carrier density will increase in semiconductors. But there is no change in charge carrier density in metals because there won't be any excitation because they are overlapping. So what happens when we heat a conductor? What happens? The electrons, the atoms, they will absorb thermal energy and the lattice vibration. So the atomic planes will start to vibrate by absorbing the heat. So when the atomic vibrations increases, when there is current flow, electron has to jump from one atom to another atom, means one plane of the atoms to another atom inside another plane. They have to jump like that, the free electrons. So that will be disturbed, or we can say that will be hindered. The flow of electrons will be disturbed in metals. Right, so what happens? The rate of flow of electron will decrease when the temperature increase due to atomic vibrations, or the plane of atoms they vibrate. That will cause the rate of flow of electrons to reduce. So the answer should be given like this. In metals, the valence band and conduction band, they overlap. Therefore, when temperature increases, there is no increase in charge carrier density, but due to increasing temperature, the lattice vibrations will increase, and it will reduce the rate of flow of electrons, and therefore the current flow will decrease. So for a given voltage, when current flow decreases, resistance will increase in conductors. That means in overall, I can say when temperature increases, resistance of the conductor will increase. Okay, question number 11. Part structure of a copper crystal is to be examined using electron diffraction, and the de Broglie wavelength of the electron is given 2.6 10 to the power minus 11 meter. They asked to calculate the potential required to accelerate the electron to obtain this particular de Broglie wavelength. Okay, so we can use lambda equal h over p, question 11b part, lambda equal h over mv, that's the equation for de Broglie wavelength. So lambda is given 2.6 10 to the power minus 11 meter, h is the Planck constant 6.63 10 to the power minus 34. Mass of the electron, you can get it from the data sheet, 9.11 10 to the power minus 31 times b. So find the speed of the electron, that will be equal to 2.80 10 to the power 7 meter per second. So this speed is obtained by accelerating electron from negative to positive terminal. So there we should use electric potential should be applied across cathode and anode. Anode is the positive terminal. Electron will be accelerated from cathode to anode. So we keep the crystal here. So this is in a closed tube like this, electron diffraction tube, we can use it. So there should be a negative terminal, this is the positive terminal. They are asking this voltage, how much should be this voltage if the electron is accelerated from here to here, and when it passes through the crystal, the speed is 2.80 10 to the power 7 meter per second. So I can say the electron is accelerated from cathode to anode. So electron is gaining kinetic energy. We assume the electron is starting its motion from rest. So I can say gain in kinetic energy is equal to work done by the electric potential So gain in kinetic energy, half m v squared minus half m u squared. Gain in electric potential, W equal QV, Q times the potential difference. But we assume the electron is starting its motion from rest. So half times 9.11 10 to the power minus 31 minus 0 equal charge of an electron 1.6 10 to the power minus 19 times V. Find the V. That's the voltage required between cathode and anode. That will be 2.2 10 to the power 3 volt. Okay, question 12, the last question of this paper. State what is meant by mass defect or mass deficit. When you consider an atom, it consists of protons and neutrons. I say this is the nucleus. So nucleus consists of protons and neutrons. When you measure the mass of the nucleus will be smaller than, mass of the nucleus will be smaller than total mass of the protons plus total mass of the neutrons when we consider mass of protons and mass of neutrons when they are much far apart or they are free. Free means they are completely free at infinite distances. So that means actually when the protons and neutrons are packed together inside the nucleus, their mass is reduced. Their mass is reduced compared to when they are free far apart, further apart from each other. That means when they are at infinite distance compared to that mass, when they are inside the nucleus, their mass is getting reduced. The reason some of the mass is used as energy, according to equal mc squared, mass has equivalent energy. So that mass is used to bind the nucleons together. That is called binding energy. Okay, so here what they are saying, why, what is meant by mass deficit? So mass deficit means the difference between total mass of the nucleons, constituent nucleons, the nucleons of the constituent nucleons of the nucleus, when you consider the total mass. So that mass should be considered when the protons and neutrons are at infinite distances. That means they are much free. That time only we will get the free neutron, free proton, their mass compared to that total mass, the mass of the nucleus is much smaller, right? Because of that, there will be difference. That difference is called mass deficit. So we can say difference between the total mass of the nucleons or total mass of the constituent nucleons when they are at infinite distance and the mass of the nucleus. The difference between the total mass of the constituent nucleons when they are at infinite distance and the mass of the nucleus is called mass deficit. Okay. Okay, big part, question number, the last question, question number 12, big part. So there's a table, mass of proton, mass of neutron, and mass of the helium nucleus are given in unified atomic mass unit. The first part of big part is show that the energy equivalence of 1 U is 934 mega electron volt. So according to special theory of relativity, mass has equivalent energy related by E equal mc square. So 1 U means 1 into converting unified atomic mass unit to kilogram multiplied by 1.66 10 to the power minus 27 into 3 into 10 to the power 8 all things squared. That is the speed of light, c squared. So you will get it in joules. But they ask you to show that in mega electron volt. So to convert electron volt, divide by 1.6 10 to the power minus 19. 1 electron volt equal 1.6 10 to the power minus 19 joules. So to convert joule to electron volt, I should divide by 1.6 10 to the power minus 19 into mega electron volt. So again I should divide by 10 to the power 6 is mega. So that is mega electron volt. Solve it, you'll get the answer 934 mega electron volt. Okay, second part, find the binding energy per nucleon of the helium-4 nucleus. Okay, so we'll find the binding energy first, binding energy of the helium nucleus. So we should find the total mass of the nucleons when they are free, that is at infinite distance. That is given on the table. Mass of proton is 1.00726 U and mass of neutron also given. Helium is consists of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. So total mass of the protons and neutrons 2 times mass of the proton 1.007276 plus mass of the neutron that also given 1.008665 minus, so this is the total mass of the nucleons when they are free at infinite distance, minus mass of the nucleus, because when they pack together their mass will decrease that forms the mass of the nucleus, that is given 4.001506. These all are in unified atomic mass unit. So that is equal to, you will get it 0.0304. I slightly approximated, times unified atomic mass unit. But I know one unified atomic mass unit is equivalent to this energy. So 0.0304 into 934 mega electron volt. So you will get that answer, that is the binding energy. Okay, but question is not that, but binding energy per nucleon. So I should divide this by 4 to find the binding energy per nucleon. I'm not solving it, I'll directly find binding energy per nucleon equals 0.0304 into 934 mega electron volt divided by 4, because helium consists of 4 nucleons, 2 protons, 2 neutrons. So that will be 7.09 mega electron volt. Okay, the last part of the last question. Isotopes of hydrogen have binding energies per nucleon of less than 3 mega electron volts. So hydrogen suggests why a nucleus of helium-4 does not spontaneously break down to become nuclei of hydrogen. Okay, so it's like this. During any nuclear or particle interaction, right? Before that, the binding energy per nucleon indicates the stability. If the binding energy per nucleon is higher, that means more energy should be supplied or should be given to remove a nucleon to infinite distance. So it's more difficult if the binding energy per nucleon of an element is higher, that is stability is higher. So remember that whenever during any nuclear or particle interaction, if the product has larger binding energy per nucleon, means that will happen easily with release of energy. For example, if you think about radioactivity also, say for example, XAZ is the parent nucleus, becomes Y plus emitting alpha particle, means if you check the binding energy per nucleon of the daughter nucleus and binding energy per nucleon of the alpha particle, each of them will have larger binding energy per nucleon compared to the parent nucleus. That means each of them are more stable compared to the parent nucleus. That's the reason the energy will be released whenever more stable nucleus are produced, or nucleus with more binding energy per nucleon are produced compared to the initial nuclei. In that situation, energy will be released, right? Also remember that whenever a nucleus is formed, energy will be released, and whenever a nucleus is broken, energy will be absorbed. So why is it possible? Means here we are giving less amount of energy to break the nucleus, that happens naturally, and release more amount of energy. So in overall, energy will be released in the form of kinetic energy of the alpha particle, right? So during any reaction, this is radioactivity or even any reaction or particle or nuclear reactions, remember that if the product has larger binding energy per nucleon, that means it's more stable than the initial element. That means energy will be released, and that will can happen easily or naturally, even during nuclear fission, nuclear fusion. In there also, if you think about uranium is bombarded by neutron that forms barium, krypton, and 3 neutrons. Right here also, if you think about the binding energy per nucleon of the barium, binding energy per nucleon of the krypton, each of their binding energy per nucleon will be larger than the binding energy per nucleon of the uranium. That's the reason this reaction is happening with the release of energy. Even during nuclear fusion reaction, 4H11 becomes helium, and there will be beta minus and neutrino are released. In here also, binding energy per nucleon, they don't have binding energy because it's a free electron, free neutrino, so they have no binding energy. But helium has binding energy, so binding energy per nucleon of helium is larger than binding energy per nucleon of the hydrogen, more stable than this one. So during this reaction, energy will be released. But we can make some reaction to happen, something like X becomes Y, by producing Z or something like that. So this is more stable and these are not stable, means energy should be supplied for that reaction to happen. Okay, if we give energy, then there it is possible the products can have lower binding energy per nucleon than the initial one, but for that reaction energy will not be released. We need to supply energy. So here they are saying the binding energy per nucleon of the hydrogen is smaller than binding energy per nucleon of the helium. We found it. Binding energy per nucleon of the helium is 7.9. So if you think about this reaction, that is hydrogen becomes helium becomes hydrogen. Is it possible for that to happen? No, because binding energy per nucleon of helium, we found it 7.09 mega electron volt. This is, they are giving less than 3 mega electron volt. So that means this is unstable compared to this. So that will not happen with release of energy. That won't happen, but you can make it to happen by supplying energy. Maybe that might happen, but this reaction never happened because this is unstable compared to this one. So the answer should be, for this part, the answer should be, you should give the amount of energy released in forming hydrogen is less compared to energy required to break the helium. So to break the helium, you are giving more energy, and when it is formed, this release only this energy. So there is no net output energy. So that reaction won't happen.